They say the rich never really look down, not at the sidewalk, not at the cracks, not at the people below. I never believed that, not until I found the envelope on my doorstep. It was cream-colored, heavy. My name was written in tight, deliberate cursive. No return address, no stamp. Just placed there, like a quiet accusation. My name is Nathaniel Ward, 46 years old, CEO of a mid-sized biotech firm in Boston. Formerly poor, now disgustingly rich. My mornings were once filled with black coffee, Bloomberg News, and silent glances with my wife over toast. But that morning, Monday, June 3rd, the envelope came. And everything changed. I stood there in my slippers, robe folded neatly over a body that hadn't been to the gym in 6 weeks. I stared at the thing like it had teeth. Inside, there were photographs. 6 of them. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. A park bench. A pair of hands. A woman in a red scarf. My wife, Claire. Then the man. He was nothing like me. Thin, older maybe. Corduroy jacket. Messy hair. His shoes were worn to the sole, creases so deep they looked like scars. In one photo, Claire was laughing at something he said. In another, her hand was on his knee. In the last one, they were walking away, arms linked. She looked younger in that photo somehow. Or maybe just free. No letter. No explanation. Just the snapshots. A small, cruel gallery. I went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table. Claire was upstairs. Still asleep, I assumed. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the blood in my ears. I stared at those photos for 20 minutes. I counted every wrinkle in his coat, every stray hair in her bun. I didn't feel rage, not at first. I felt curiosity. Not the good kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that whispers, who is he? And why him? It was the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. Not grief. Not revenge. Something quieter. Colder. Claire came downstairs around 8. She kissed me on the cheek and poured herself coffee. She didn't notice the photos. Or maybe she did, and chose not to look. She wore the red scarf. "Morning," she said, with that tone married people use when their souls are far apart but the routines are close. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. That morning, she talked about the fundraiser she was planning at the gallery. About the wine they'd chosen. About how the weather might hold. She never once asked why I looked like someone had just handed me a ghost and an envelope. After she left, I went to my office, but I couldn't think. My assistant brought coffee. I left it untouched. I stared out the window at the Charles River and tried to imagine who the man was. That night, I didn't confront her. I watched her instead. I studied her as if she were a painting I hadn't seen before, trying to find the flaw, the crack in the varnish. She talked about nothing, and I answered with silence. But in my mind, I was walking the streets, looking for a man with weathered shoes. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew I wouldn't let it go. I started by following her. Not out of pettiness. Not yet. It was something more elemental. A need to map the truth. To chart the distance between what I believed about my life and what it really was. Claire left every Thursday morning at 10 for her art volunteer shift at the Children's Center. Or so I thought. That week, I followed her in a rental car. Something untraceable. Beige, boring, invisible. She didn't go to the Children's Center. She went to a small coffee shop across the river. Foster's Grounds. A worn little place that had probably been charming in the 80s. No music. No Wi-Fi. Just mismatched chairs, yellowed books, and people who still use pocket notebooks. I parked across the street. Watched her go inside. She ordered a drink, black, no sugar, and sat at a table in the corner. He arrived 7 minutes later. Same corduroy jacket, same wild hair, same tired shoes. She smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile she hadn't given me in a decade. They talked. She touched his hand. He leaned in, said something that made her laugh. I sat in that car and felt small. Not angry. Not yet. Still curious. Who is this man, and how did he reach her where I could not? I came back the next Thursday, and the one after that, and every time they met. Same table. Same smiles. Same quiet intimacy. I started collecting details. He carried a worn leather notebook. He drank tea. He once showed her something on his phone, a photo, I think, and she teared up. Each week I gathered more. A small biography built from gestures. Eventually, I walked inside. Not when they were there. Another day. A Tuesday morning. I pretended I was just looking for a quiet place to read. I ordered a tea. Sat in their corner. Watched the dust dance in the sunlight. The barista was a young woman with a lazy ponytail and thick-rimmed glasses. She looked like she belonged in a different decade. I asked her casually, "Do you know the man who comes in on Thursdays? Gray jacket. Hair like Einstein." She smirked. "Oh, Caleb?" "Yeah. He's a regular." "Caleb," I repeated, tasting the name. It felt too soft for what he'd done. "He a friend of yours?" she asked. "Not exactly." She shrugged. "He's harmless. Bit of a poet, I think. Lives around the corner. Rents a room over the laundromat." A poet. Of course. That night, I found the laundromat. Walked past it twice. Upstairs, a narrow set of stairs led to a blue door with peeling paint. That was where he lived. That was where she went. I sat across the street in the beige rental and imagined their conversations. I imagined his voice, low and kind. I imagined her smiling in ways she hadn't with me since we were 28. When I came home, Claire was painting in the upstairs studio. She'd been doing that more lately. Abstract stuff. Harsh lines. Sharp colors. "Do you love it?" she asked when she saw me watching. "It's intense," I said, which was true. She looked at it for a long time. "That's the point." Later that night, I opened her laptop. It wasn't locked. We'd never had passwords between us. I don't know if that was a sign of trust or just arrogance. There were no emails to Caleb. No love letters. Nothing obvious. But in her downloads folder, half buried, there was a poem. It was called "The Man Who Found Me." It didn't mention a name, but it mentioned shoes. Weathered shoes. And a heart like a forgotten piano, waiting to be tuned. She hadn't written it. I could tell. The phrasing wasn't hers. The soul of it was foreign. Gentle. I printed it out and folded it into my wallet. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I started writing. Not for her. For myself. Notes. Questions. A list titled "What She Sees in Him." And one question at the bottom, underlined 3 times. Why did she stop seeing me? The next Thursday, I followed him. After the coffee. After the laughs and the hand touches. I followed Caleb from the shop to a tiny bookstore called Vine Anvers. He greeted the owner like an old friend. They talked about a reading coming up. Caleb handed her a page, probably another poem, and she beamed like he'd handed her a diamond. Later, I saw him give a sandwich to a homeless man near the train stop. No performance. Just kindness. He didn't look like a man having an affair. He looked like a man keeping someone alive. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to Claire and listened to the sound of her breath and wondered when I'd become a stranger in my own home. I wasn't angry yet, but I was close, and I still hadn't spoken a word to Caleb. 3 weeks after the envelope arrived, I walked into Foster's grounds at exactly 10:57 a.m. Claire wasn't there, but Caleb was. He was hunched over a small notebook, scribbling in a way that made him oblivious to the world. His tea sat untouched. His shoes were, again, those same sad, cracked things, like they were holding memories in the soles. I stood at the counter pretending to examine a tray of stale muffins, then ordered a black coffee. I took the seat across from him without asking. He looked up, startled but not rude. "Yes?" he asked, squinting, like I was interrupting a thought. "You don't know me," I said. "But I know you." He paused, pen frozen midair. "That's an ominous way to introduce yourself. I'm Claire's husband." The words dropped like coins on a hollow table. He blinked, then slowly set the pen down, closed the notebook, and leaned back in his chair. "I see," he said softly. "And now you're here." I didn't know what I expected. Shock? Denial? An apology? But he wasn't rattled. Just calm. Like he'd been waiting for this day. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said. He nodded. "Good. This isn't really the kind of place for grand gestures. They burn the muffins." Something about his voice, measured, weathered, poetic, bothered me. It felt like the opposite of my world, where things were quick, decisive, sharp. His world seemed to breathe slower. "Why her?" I asked. He studied me for a moment. "That's a strange question." "It's an honest one." He looked down at the table, then out the window. "She listened," he said finally. "That's all. She listens to me too." "No," he said, not cruelly, but firmly. "She hears you. That's not the same." A long silence settled between us. I hated that he said that, mostly because I understood it. I looked at him closely. He had a softness in his eyes. Not weakness, softness. Like someone who'd had everything break once, and decided to build it back slower. "I don't know if you crossed any lines yet," I said. He looked at me with genuine confusion. "Crossed? You know what I mean. I haven't touched her." That surprised me. "But you meet her every week. You talk. You write poems." "I don't write them for her," he said. "I write them because I can't help it. She just ends up in them." Another silence. Not hostile. Just full. He finally asked, "Do you love her?" "Yes." "But do you see her?" "I see her every day." "That's not what I asked." I stood. "I don't know what this is," I said. "But it ends. Understand?" He didn't flinch. "I understand that you're afraid," he said quietly. "But I don't think you understand what you're afraid of." I left before I said something I'd regret. But he was right about one thing. I was afraid. Not of losing her. Of realizing I already had. That night, I found Claire in the kitchen, barefoot, drinking red wine and humming a tune I didn't recognize. I stood in the doorway and asked, "Why him?" She turned slowly, holding her glass like a shield. "I didn't plan it," she said. "That's not an answer." She sat at the table and gestured for me to sit across from her. I did. "Do you remember our wedding vows?" she asked. "Of course. You said, 'I will build a world so strong no one could ever take you from it.'" I remembered that line. I'd meant it. "And you did," she said. "You built a world. With walls. With systems. With a calendar. A fortress." She took a sip of wine. "And somewhere in all of it, I stopped existing in it. I was watched. Not seen." I didn't know what to say. "I didn't sleep with him," she added. "I still haven't. But you wanted to?" I wanted to feel like I mattered. That broke something in me. Not from betrayal, from recognition. She said it so plainly, like it wasn't personal, like it wasn't even about him, like she'd been drifting for years, and just finally washed ashore somewhere I hadn't bothered to look. I wanted to scream, to accuse. But instead I asked, "Do you love him?" "No," she said. "But I might." She stood and left the room. And I was left at the table, with nothing but a memory of promises I thought were still holding. The next morning, I sat at my desk and unfolded the poem again. The one titled "The Man Who Found Me." I read it 3 times. And I didn't feel hate. I felt envy. He had found something in her I had forgotten to look for. And maybe that was worse than anything else. I hadn't been in the piano room for 3 years. That's not to say we didn't have one. Every house of a certain price point has a room that's more for show than use. Ours had high ceilings, large windows, and an antique Steinway Claire's grandmother left her. It sat in the corner like a beautiful relic, too sacred to touch, too heavy to move. That Friday, I unlocked the door and sat at the bench. The air smelled like old books and lemon oil. Dust had gathered in the corners of the keys. I ran a finger over middle C, not pressing, just tracing. Then I played. Not well. Not fluently. But enough. The first time Claire had heard me play was before we were married. I'd taught myself in college, after hours in the student lounge. Back when I was broke and hungry and believed that art mattered more than business plans. That night, she told me the sound made her feel like we were the only 2 people left in the world. I'd stopped playing sometime after my second promotion. Too many meetings. Too many expectations. And then one day I walked past the room without even noticing it. But that morning I played. Claire came to the door after 10 minutes. She stood quietly watching. "You haven't touched that in years," she said. "I know." "Why now?" I didn't look at her when I said it. "Because I remembered I used to be someone else." She didn't speak. She just walked over and sat beside me on the bench. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just listened to the space between the notes. After a while, she whispered, "You used to be more than your calendar." "I know," I said again. And for a moment, just a breath, it felt like we were 2 people who might still find their way back. Later that day, I went to see Caleb again. He was sitting in the park this time, reading aloud to a group of kids. One of them was asleep in the grass. Another was laughing too hard at a joke I'd missed. I waited until they dispersed. He saw me coming and didn't seem surprised. "Mr. Ward," he said, "I take it you've had some time to think. I'm not here to argue." "Good," he said, closing his book. "I left my dueling gloves at home." I smirked to spite myself. "What is it you want from her?" He looked up, startled. "Nothing." "Then why keep meeting?" "Because she wants to." "That's not an answer." He paused. "She found a space where she could breathe. I didn't create it. I just didn't close the windows." That line hit harder than I wanted it to. "Do you love her?" I asked. He looked out at the trees. "Maybe. In a quiet way. The way you love someone who reminds you that you're still human. She's still my wife." "I know." There was no anger in him. No challenge. "Are you waiting for me to leave her?" I asked. "No," he said. "But I think you already did. You just didn't notice." That stung. Deep. I sat beside him on the bench, not entirely sure why. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Handed it to me. "I wrote this last night," he said. "I don't know why, but it feels like it's yours now." I hesitated, then took it. The poem was titled, "The Man with the Castle." It wasn't cruel. It was about walls. About towers. about windows sealed shut, about a man who built his life so high he forgot what the ground felt like. I read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. "I don't like you," I said. "I wouldn't expect you to. But I don't hate you either. That's something." I stood. "I don't know what comes next," I admitted. He looked at me with something almost like mercy. "That's where all the good things begin." That night, I invited Claire to dinner. No agenda. No accusations. Just dinner. We went to the little bistro where we used to celebrate small wins, birthdays, job interviews, good news that didn't involve stock prices. She wore the green dress I hadn't seen in years. The one with a faint tear on the right shoulder she always forgot to fix. I asked her about her art. She asked me about the piano. We talked like people who still remembered how. I didn't bring up Caleb. She didn't bring up the distance. We just were. As we left, she slipped her hand into mine. No words. Just the familiar weight of something that might still be reparable. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know if she was coming back to me. I didn't know if I even knew how to be the version of myself she remembered. But I knew I wanted to try. And that was new. It's strange how easily we mistake routine for intimacy. For years, Claire and I shared space, schedules, even silences, but not selves. And now, after a single dinner and a few tentative glances, I found myself chasing a memory of who we were, hoping it could become who we are. On Sunday, I wrote her a letter. Not typed. Not dictated. Handwritten. 7 pages. It was the most honest thing I'd done in a decade. I told her everything. I told her how I used to wake up early just to watch her sleep before she noticed. How I used to memorize her laugh so I could hear it in my head during long meetings. I confessed that I'd become consumed by goals, metrics, strategy, things that never smiled back. And I told her I followed her. I told her I met Caleb. I told her I understood, even if it broke me. But I didn't give her the letter. I folded it, placed it in the drawer by my bed, and left it there. It wasn't a confession. It was a reminder, to myself, that I was still capable of truth. That week, things changed. Not dramatically. Just slightly. Claire started leaving her studio door open. She hummed more. She asked me to try her new soup recipe, even though I'm famously useless in the kitchen. And I did. I burned the bread. Twice. We laughed. That laugh stayed with me longer than it should have. On Thursday, I went to Foster's grounds again. Alone. Claire didn't go anymore. She hadn't told me why, and I hadn't asked. But I needed to know if Caleb would be there. He wasn't. The barista told me he hadn't come in all week. Said he sometimes disappeared like that. "Goes off to chase the river," she said, like it was a normal thing people did. I walked to the bookstore. Vine and Verse. The owner recognized me, though we'd never spoken. "You're Nathaniel," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "He told me about you. Said if a tall, haunted-looking man came by, to give him this." She handed me a small envelope. Plain white. No name. Inside, there was a single note. "I think you've started writing again. That's enough reason to step away. She doesn't need 2 mirrors. Just one that finally sees her." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. That afternoon, I walked the streets of Caleb's neighborhood. Past the laundromat. Up to the blue door. I knocked. No answer. Through the window, I saw boxes. He'd left. Quietly. Without ceremony. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked home. Claire was in the garden when I returned. Kneeling in the dirt, her hands coated with earth and purpose. "I didn't know you liked gardening," I said. I don't, she replied. But the soil doesn't lie to me. I knelt beside her, ruining a pair of pants I probably paid too much for. We planted lavender. In silence. Later, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "He's gone, isn't he?" "Yes." She didn't ask how I knew. We didn't talk about it again. That night, I opened the drawer and took out the letter. I walked to the fireplace, ready to burn it. But I didn't. I folded it back up and placed it in her studio, beneath a half-finished canvas. Not to force anything. Not to demand forgiveness. Just so she'd know. Just so she'd see that I still remembered how to speak in my own voice. A week passed. Then 2. One morning, I found a note on my pillow. 5 words, written in red ink. "You still see me. Finally." Claire's art exhibit opened on a Thursday night in mid-October. It was held at a small gallery downtown, all exposed brick and track lighting, one of those spaces that smells like varnish and vision. The crowd was a mix of people I didn't recognize, and some I vaguely remembered from old dinners I'd forgotten to enjoy. Critics, donors, art students. A few spoke in that airy, abstract way people do when they're afraid to admit they don't understand what they're looking at. But I understood. Because the centerpiece of the exhibit wasn't abstract. It was a painting of shoes. Weathered, cracked, beautiful in their ruin. Set against a backdrop of a park bench and a red scarf. She hadn't titled it. No label, no placard. But everyone in the room was drawn to it. Even me. I stood before it for a long time. Claire came to stand beside me, a glass of white wine in her hand. She wore the green dress again. The tear had been stitched. "You didn't name it," I said quietly. "No," she replied. "Felt dishonest to give it a name. Some things don't belong to anyone." "You miss him?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Sometimes." It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Because I missed him too, in a strange way. His quiet honesty. His inconvenient truth. The way he reflected the parts of me I'd buried so deep, I forgot they had names. "I wrote a new piece," I told her. Her eyes flicked toward mine. "Poetry?" she asked, surprised. "No," I smiled. "Piano. But I gave it a title." She waited. "Second Chances in G minor." She laughed, a soft, warm sound that lived in my chest longer than it should have. "I'd like to hear it sometime." "You will." After the exhibit, we walked the long way to the car, under streetlights flickering like blinking eyes. Claire took my hand again. Not out of obligation. Out of habit rediscovered. "I read the letter," she said finally. 3 times. I figured you did. Do you mean it?" "All of it." She nodded. "Then we have a chance." That word, chance, wasn't a guarantee. But it was more than I'd had in months. And somehow, that was enough. 3 days later, I got a letter. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. It wasn't long. "Nathaniel, you were never the villain. Just a man who forgot the quiet music in his own home. I hope you play again." See. Folded inside was a poem. This one titled, "The Man Who Took Off His Armor." It was about forgiveness. Not from a lover. From the mirror. I framed it. Hung it in my office. Right next to a photo of Claire and me, taken before either of us forgot how to speak. And below it, on a shelf of books I'd never read, I placed a small, scuffed pair of shoes I found in a thrift store 2 towns over. They weren't his, of course, but they looked just enough like them to matter. It's strange, the way a life rearranges itself. One day, you're orbiting a version of yourself you no longer recognize, and the next, you're in the kitchen at 7 a.m. cracking eggs into a pan, humming something wordless, while your wife trims basil in the windowsill. No grand speech. No dramatic kiss in the rain. Just peace. Earned, not given. Claire and I never went to therapy. We went to breakfast. Twice a week, at the same diner, cheap coffee, crack menus, vinyl booze. We learned to speak in the language of small things. Did you sleep okay? Have you seen my scarf? Want to split the pancakes? Sometimes, rebuilding isn't about bricks. It's about breakfast. I kept writing. At first in private, then publicly in small ways. Claire suggested I submit something to the winter showcase at Vine and Verse. I laughed. Then I did it. They published one of my pieces in a collection called Late Arrivals. The poem was titled, The Woman in the Garden. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. One night, Claire asked if I missed him. Caleb. I didn't lie. Some days, yes. She nodded, like she understood. He reminded you of who you were before the walls. And he reminded you there was still someone inside the ruins, I added. We sat in silence a long time. Then she said, Sometimes I think he was never meant to stay. Maybe he wasn't, but maybe that was the point. Months passed. We bought new shoes, walked different paths, laughed in unfamiliar places. The world didn't change, but we did, one piece at a time. On the anniversary of the day I found the envelope, I returned to the bench at the park. Not out of grief, out of gratitude. I sat there with a thermos of coffee and watched the city breathe. No letter came this time. No ghost in the mail. Just wind and light and the whisper of people who pass through our lives not to stay, but to wake something we've forgotten. A boy walked by with his mother. He pointed to the bench and said, That's the place where the music man used to sit. I smiled. He wasn't wrong. And neither was I. Because in the end, it wasn't about losing my wife to someone else. It was about finding her again when I had stopped looking. And finding myself, too. Under the suits. Behind the routines. Beyond the silence. Still there. Still possible. Still listening.